The Death of God. Hey, this is Stefan, author of In Search of the Sublime. You can read the book for free on worldhistorybook.com. Let's start. Nietzsche was one of the most influential philosophers of the 19th century. His work is hard to summarize, and he mostly wrote disconnected paragraphs jumping from one topic to the next, sometimes even contradicting himself. Instead of making systematic and watertight logical arguments as philosophers generally do, Nietzsche blurted out incoherent fragments with half-worked-out ideas. As a result, he called himself a philosopher with a hammer. Yet some of these disconnected paragraphs contain true gems. Among them his description of a madman who announced the death of God. Let's discuss this. To start with, it is important to understand that the death of God was not a critique on Christianity. It also wasn't something Nietzsche was particularly happy about. Actually, as we'll still see, he was very worried about it. What it was instead was an observation of what had happened to the culture, to Western Europe, since Darwin's publication of the theory of evolution. Through the theory of natural selection, Darwin had found a way to explain how life evolved in all its various complex forms, without the need of divine intervention. With the advance of science, Nietzsche concluded, quote, "The belief in the Christian God has become unbelievable. Humanity had woken up from its mythological past, and as a result the belief in God just didn't seem like a realistic standpoint anymore that any serious person could hold." Since Darwin, a cultural shift had happened. The spell was broken to such an extent that many critics no longer even felt the need to make the logical case against God. Nietzsche wrote, "What is now decisive against Christianity is our taste and no longer our reasons." And this is what Nietzsche did. He didn't repeat the intellectual arguments of his predecessors against religion, but instead he wanted to capture the gradual disappearance of God through the lens of a sociologist or an anthropologist. In one of his most famous passages on the topic, found in the book The Gay Science, also called The Joyous Science, Fröhliche Wissenschaft in German, from 1882, he imagined an apocalyptic madman who ran onto a marketplace, bringing the news of the death of God. It is worth reading the paragraph in full because it is remarkably beautiful. Let's go. "Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours? He ran to the marketplace and he cried incessantly, 'I see God, I see God.' As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then, he provoked much laughter. 'Has he got lost?' asked one. 'Did he lose his way like a child?' asked another. The madman then jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. 'Whither is God?' he cried. 'I will tell you, we have killed him, you and I. All of us are his murderers.'" And now the quote becomes particularly poetic. We continue, "But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon?" Both the sea and the horizon are here, of course, metaphors for the infinite, for God. So he's saying, how can we have killed something that is infinite? We continue, "What were we doing when we unchained this earth from the sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually, backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? Is there still even any up or down? Are we not straying as through an infinite nothing?" Or in other words, God gave structure and meaning to our lives, and now we cannot even distinguish up from down. We are now people without direction. We continue, "Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continuously closing in on us? Do we not need to light lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the grave diggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing as yet of the divine decomposition? Gods too decompose. God is dead. God remains dead, and we have killed him. And how shall we comfort ourselves, the murderers of all murderers? What was holiest and mightiest of all, that the world has yet owned, has bled to death under our knives. Who will wipe this blood of us? What water is there to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement, what sacred games shall we have to invent to atone for this? Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us human beings? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us, for the sake of this deed, he will belong to a higher history than all history hitherto. We then read that the crowd was not ready yet to hear his message, but the madman was right. The unthinkable had happened. The gods, who had been part of mankind from the beginning of our history, had finally lost their power. Even those who still wanted to believe just weren't able to do so to the same degree. And when people used to enter a church, they would feel the presence of God. But now the best one could do was to just feel some nostalgia for an archaic time. Nietzsche wrote, "It has been related further that on that same day the madman forced his way into several churches, and there he struck up his Requiem Aeternam Deo, or the Requiem for the Eternal God." A requiem being a mass for the dead. Let out of these churches and called to account, the madman is said always to have replied nothing but, quote, "What are all these churches now, if they are not the tombs and sepulchres of God?" Beautiful poetic language. According to Nietzsche, however, the death of God wouldn't immediately lead to a world without religion. We quote, "God is dead, but given the way of men, there may still be caves for thousands of years in which his shadow will be shown." And now, more than 100 years after Nietzsche's death, this in fact turned out to be a good prediction. The fall of God was also strongly felt in the arts. In the past, the concept of God had infused the universe for us human beings with a deep sense of divine meaning, but without any transcendent ideals to strive for anymore. Art plunged into banality, which we see to the present day. An artist that was purposely playing with this idea was Pablo Picasso, and a remarkable example of such a painting is the Guernica from 1937. Here we see a fallen hero of the bombing of Guernica from the Second World War. But the hero, who is depicted here on the bottom, is just shown as a broken hollow statue, and his horse, more to the top, as a fragmentary two-dimensional cutout. And all the way to the left, we even see the body of the deceased Jesus in the arms of Mary, an important religious theme from the Middle Ages. But Jesus here looks more like a doll. It depicts a world where that ultimate meaning that used to come from that concept of God had disappeared. Today, our world has become even more secular than in Nietzsche's time, yet many people still believe we have yet to come to terms with the death of God. Thank you for listening. If you want to know more about this topic, read my chapter in my book, In Search of the Sublime. You can read it for free on worldhistorybook.com. Bye bye.